Hey, this is Don from Paralock Technologies again with another question and answer. Today we're going to be talking about the two type of posture flows that you can do in ICE. It's going to be redirection base and then non-redirection flow. Difference between the two is one's going to have a redirection ACL and a redirection URL. The other one will not have that. So we're going to go down to the whiteboard here, and I'm going to draw it out from a theory perspective so that, we'll do theory first, and then I'll show you non-redirection flow in the lab, because, in the lab, some virtualized equipment doesn't sometimes get a little wonky with the redirection base, but I'll explain redirection base in here, and I'll also explain non-redirection flow. So first of all, let's talk about redirection base. All right, redirection based posture flow. So the bones of this is pretty much the same. From a posture perspective, you're still going to have your conditions, you're going to have your remediation action, your requirements, your posture policy, and client provisioning policy. All that needs to be in play. So the assumption is this is already in play, and we're just talking about the flows here. Now, if you want to do a video on posture, completely setting it up, like what it looks like, I'll do that as well. But I'll show you in the lab because it's already done. But if you want me to go through, all the details of, the conditions, the remediation, the requirements, all that good stuff, posture policy from an authorization profile perspective, client provisioning policy, I'll just show you that in the lab. So let's talk about redirection base. So redirection base, basically, you're going to be in a situation here where you're going to have your ICE nodes back here. So we'll say PSN1, PSN2, and then you'll have your admin monitor, if you want to set it up like this. I'm just using this to illustrate a point. Then you have your network here somewhere in there. Just say internal network. And then you'll have your, access switches over here. I'm just putting ASWF for access switches. So ASWS to ASWS3, and they're connected in, and everything there. So now, say a device tries to sign in. Now the device needs to have the posture module on it. There is a non-posture module version of this, but I don't like that. It rarely works. This is always going to work. So when they try to connect in for redirection base, they go in, radio session starts. You authenticate. Then what happens is usually going to do one or two things. You can either push a DACL down or you can not push a DACL down. If you want to be extra safe on what this device is able to do before it's actually allowed on the network from a compliancy standpoint, you push a DACL down. So from the DACL, you would say you get DHCP, you get DNS, you get access to both PSN. So PSN 1 and 2, and I usually do ICNP just to validate, reachability just in case. Oh, and don't DNS is in there. Then what gets pushed in that authorization or in that session, that authentication session, or if you use an IBNS 2.0 access session, is once that comes in from the workload, which is the PSN, what you will see is two things. First thing it's going to do is going to call an ACL that's already on the switch. So this is going to be your posture, I spell that, posture redirect ACL. Now, this ACL is on this switch, it's on this switch, it's on this switch. Now, this is one of the downsides of you using redirection base, because this ACL needs to be on every single switch in your environment. The access switches, not any kind of core distribution switch or distribution and then core switches don't need this. It's all access switches, because this whole NAC is basically an access switch or edge technique. So the next thing that's going to get pushed in, or that's going to dictate what gets, the posture redirect ACL basically dictates what gets redirected. Usually there's two types here that I like to do here, which is a light redirect and a full redirect. So the right redirect, if you looked at the flow and posture from the module perspective, it tries to reach out to enroll.cisco.com first. That's the first probe, or one of the probes. Let me say that. So what we like to do here is we like to basically make the posture redirect ACL look for any traffic going to this FQDN, but you can't do FQDNs in the switch, so you have to do it by the IP address, and that goes out to, I think, 72.163.1.80. So your ACL will basically say permit IP any to 172.163.1.80. So when that probe happens, and it goes to enroll.cisco.com, that gets redirected to ICE, and then, the scan happens. Then after the scan happens, which technically happens on the posture module, it sends that to ICE to say, hey, I'm either not compliant or compliant. If I'm compliant, the PSN will send a COA to the access switch. Let me put COA here, which is change of authorization, and we'll change it from this DACL to something that's like permit IP any. All right. And then that's the final authorization. You can put an SGT on top of this as well. So you can do TrustSec after they have been compliant and got onto the network. So what is the problem with this? Very simple. The redirect ACL needs to be put everywhere. And if you forget to put it on the switch, your posturing will not work. The other thing that can happen, and I've seen, like if your underlay network is not right, you may have an issue with posturing, and you may have a asynchronous kind of thing where it says compliant on the module, but the access session still says non-compliant. So you may have some latency there as well. You could have that in non-redirection flow as well, but I've seen it a lot in redirection-based flow. But this is the redirection base. You're going to need this posture redirect ACL. You're going to still push the DACLs. You're going to have to make sure the real bad one is this. The posture redirect ACL needs to be everywhere. That's really the problem. Nothing really bad, just the posture redirect. Now, the benefit of this compared to non-redirection based posture flow is you get to know the PSN that owns the session immediately. Right? In non-redirection, you kind of don't know, and I'm going to explain the difference between the two. But when you look at the access session, you will actually see the PSN that's telling you, hey, I need to run the posture scan. This is where you're going to go for the posture redirect, or to initiate the posture redirect flow. So that's redirection-based posture flow in a nutshell. So now let's talk about non-redirection. So non-redirection works a little differently, gets you the same result, but you can do this for things that are, I've seen this with people when they want to do posturing on Meraki switches, because you can't push DACLs to Merakis. So I've seen them use it here, but I've used it on enterprise equipment as well. I kind of like this, but it does put a little bit of workload on your monitoring node, right? And why do I say that? So let's do the same topology here. PSN1, PSN2, AM, internal network, access switches here. AS, AS, AS. 1, 2, 3 in the network. Now, when the device tries to get on the network, same thing happens. All right. Posture modules up here, same thing. Now the difference is when the radius session starts, there is no posture redirect that you are calling. This is why it's called non-redirection based posture flow. There's no posture redirect ACL on any of these. All right. So you don't have to worry about that. So what do? Well, you still push that DACL down in your unknown posture authorization profile. So you still push that down. And you say, okay, this machine can still only get DHCP, DNS, access to the PSNs 1 and 2, ICMP. Now, the difference is when the posture module runs, now this has to be done within the XML file. So let me make that a key distinction here. The XML file has the non-redirect flow enabled. There's a little checkbox in there. And I'll probably show you when I show you in the lab that there's a little checkbox that says enable non-redirection flow. In fact, when you now open up the posture editor, that's checked off by default. So if you don't want to do that, you need to uncheck it. But what it will do is it will run the scan at the call home list. So it'll look for one of these PSNs. Now, let's say PSN 1 owns the session, but the posture module ended up going to, ended up going here. Let's say for some reason, posture module went that way. Well, PSN 2 doesn't own the session, so it doesn't know anything about it. This is where it now has to query the monitoring node. Let's say this is your primary monitoring node and say, hey, who owns this session? All right. Actually, PSN 1 owns the session. So now PSN 1 now has to go and do the posturing or do the scan. Once that scan happens, same thing as the normal posturing. The only difference between this is there is no redirect. So because there's no redirect, you have to have this query function here to determine who owns the session. And then once the session is determined, that ultimately is going to be the thing that does the scanning and everything between the posture module and whatever PSN owns it. And then your final, after, your compliance checks, whether they're compliant or not compliant, after that goes through, you have your final authorization that happens after that. That's the only difference. Now, which one should you use? Redirect posture flow is tried and true. The only difference is you run into a little hairy situation when you start having like Meraki switches in there, because you can't really push down. You can't call an ACL per se. That's what I've seen so far. A lot of people are moving over to non-redirection just because they like the fact that you don't really need to set all this up on every switch. You don't need to set up the redirect ACL on every switch, because if you miss that, it's a problem on whatever switch. But you have the trade-off of now you get the monitoring node involved, because if it goes to a PSN that doesn't own the session, I have to query who owns the session and have that whole flow going. That's the difference between the two. Not really hard from a technical standpoint or implementation standpoint. The theory is you just got to understand, what are you going to use for redirection versus non-redirection, and it's really simple. Redirect ACL is going to be on there. Non-redirection is not going to have a redirect ACL, and it's not going to have a redirect URL in there. So in this version, you do not know who your PSN is immediately. Why? Because remember I said in the last slide, the redirect URL is actually pushed in the session down to the switch, right? Ultimately down to the switch. So you know who the PSN is immediately. And this non-redirection flow, you don't know, because I'm not telling the module what PSN to go to, right? That happens behind the scenes with the query and all that good stuff. So you may have a little bit of a second of, if you're really timing it, of, wait for the posture scan to run. That's really the difference. So if you want a little bit more detail about this, you can read the Cisco documentation. But I pretty much read that and summarized it up for you. Hope this video was informative. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. The next video, I'm just going to show you what non-redirection flow actually looks like. And then, you'll know how to do posture, at least non-redirection flow. So Again, this is Don from Parallel Technologies. Hope this video was informative. Thank you and have a nice day.